Okay, let's look at the game Fischer versus Keres, played in 1959 from Zurich, Switzerland. I believe it was in March of that year. Yeah, March 6th, 1959. It is a Ruy Lopez, a C99, so I'm always happy about that. But where within the Ruy Lopez does it fall? Let's ask ChessBase. And so I'm going to do an opening classification, and this will tell us where the game falls within the big key of ChessBase. The big key is based upon the ECO, the Encyclopedia of Chess Openings, developed by Chess Informant. Here it is, 15, Bishop D3. And right over here, we see Fischer and Keres. So this is the game. It's interesting to note from this list that Keres would be playing this game would be playing this opening just a few months later against Smyslov. In that game, Keres will have a better result. He will win. We notice over here, it is C99. Over here on the left, it is C99, a closed Ruy Lopez, the Chigorin defense. So there, then it does go 11 d4, queen c7, 12, knight bd2, and then c takes d4 with Keres opening the c file, wanting to attack down that c file, and that's exactly why the bishop has to decide where to go. It can go to, as you see here in the key, bishop d3 is one of the possibilities, 15, bishop b1, and then also 15, rook e2. Bobby chose bishop d3. Now, I was curious as to how often this line was played, and I really only found one other game that followed this line, and it was played back in 2015. I was very surprised by that. And so I grabbed all three of these games and I put them in their own temporary database. Let's take a look at that. I'll close this and this. And here are the games: Fischer-Keres, Smyslov-Keres, and then Essler Saputra. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. And that was in what looks like is the Oregon Championship from 2015. Yeah. So let's take all three of these games and we'll go ahead and merge them and be able to see where they vary. So you can see here is the 15 bishop d3, and as already said, the bishop could have gone down to b1 to escape this attack of the queen and rook, or the rook could have come up to e2 to defend the bishop. Fischer chose to bring the bishop here up to d3. Well, then what happens? Keres plays knight c6, which is here, but later Keres would play knight d7 in his game against Smyslov. Is that a better move? Well, I don't know. It's certainly a different move, and the position is quite different. And this is one of the fascinating things about these lines. 50 some years later, in the Oregon Championship, the line would be followed even more deeply, and it would go down to to rook c1, which is the attack by Fischer down the c file with this rook, going through the knight and pinning the knight to the queen. And so in that game, Keres plays his queen to b8, but Saputra will play e takes d4. And we get a very exciting game. I haven't done any computer analysis on it, but there is a very serious attack that gets unleashed against the king, and it is very fun to watch. So this is a little bit about the game and about the history and even how it has been played within the last 20 years or so. Well, this video is mainly about whether or not I can recall the moves and play them from memory. For me, one thing interesting about the game was when I first reviewed it, I thought to myself, there's no way I'm going to be able to remember the game, to understand it enough to be able to actually memorize it. But I think I have succeeded, and I think I will be able to replay it. Let's see how I do. Here is the game, played in Zurich, Fischer and Keres. Let's go to Learn, and let's hope I don't get any errors this time. Fischer is playing the white pieces, and I don't think I need a clock. So let's just go ahead and see if I can play this game from memory. Fischer opens up e4, and we get e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop goes to b5. I just want to make sure you can see the board. There we go. That's probably a little better. Now I'm not using notes or anything like that. This is just whether or not I can play the game from memory. And you can see the board good. All right, well, this is going to be a closed roue. And so because of that, black plays bishop to e7, and that's a closed roue. An open roue would be the knight taking on e4, and that is certainly an option. So now white defends. And this, because of this, now this pawn on e5 of black's really is threatened. So black has to drive this bishop away so it doesn't capture the knight on c6. Now there's always a question in my mind about, is it d6 or is it castles? What's the order of the moves here? What I have found is that most of the play is d6. White takes the opportunity to move his pawn as well. This will provide an escape route for the bishop when it is attacked by the black knight moving from c3 onto a5. And here, black castles and h3. Now the knight comes to a5, attacking the bishop, and the bishop hides away. This move of the knight makes it possible to bring forward the pawn onto c5. With no delay at all, white launches his pawn onto d4. Keres is going to end up taking the pawn, c takes d, early, but not before he puts his queen on c7. His idea is that he wants to attack down the c file, so he will open up the c file pretty much as soon as possible, and as soon as possible means now that Bobby has started to move his knight on the typical journey, which is knight on b1 to d2 to f1, and then either to e3 or to g3. Keres now takes on d, and Bobby responds. This file is now open. Keres wants to then put his rook on c8 and form a rook and queen battery. So here comes the bishop. Yep, got that right. And Bobby continues with his traveling knight, going now to f1. The rook on a8 comes over, attacking down the c file. Now, this bishop has to go somewhere, as we were speaking of earlier, and this is a key point within the chess base key. Does the bishop go to d2? Does it go to b1? Or does the rook come up onto e2 and defend? Bobby chooses to play the move bishop d3. Now, at some point, Keres is going to want to bring this knight back onto c6, and I think he does it. Very early. Yeah, he's going to put the knight on c6, and then he is going to capture the d4 pawn with the knight. So this knight comes over to c6. Well, as we might expect, Bobby continues with his knight journey, which is to put his knight now up here onto e3. It wants to go to f5 or perhaps to d5. In the Shokran game, which Bobby would have played, I think, 6 months previous, Shokran would have played something like g6 to prevent the knight coming on to f5. Keres does not do that. Instead, he plays his rook to e8, making room for the bishop. So in other words, he's allowing the knight to come onto f5. Now, there are some that will tell you, and I don't disagree, that a knight on the 5th rank is considerably more valuable than just an ordinary knight. Keres does not want to give up his bishop, so the bishop moves back to f8. Well, it seems like a full-on attack is happening here. The bishop, Bobby's bishop, dark-squared bishop, comes to g5. And one of the things that I found interesting about this variation, this line, is that the pieces just seem to disappear, as it were, from their location. Almost saying, oh, you thought you were attacking me. Well, no, you're not attacking me. And they just move away. The bishop moved away, now the knight moves away. Well, with this C file now cleared, Bobby brings his rook over to C1 with a threat on the queen, an immediate push of D5. The queen immediately goes back to B8. And with the rook now on C1, this bishop on D3 doesn't need to be standing on this file at all. And so it comes back here to B1. Now we're going to get Keres's turn, as it were, to play some moves without having to simply respond to Bobby. So I think what he's going to do here is he's going to play knight takes D4, then we're going to have knight takes knight, but then Keres is going to put in an intermediary move, which is to take the rook, and then the bishop will have to come back here and capture. Bobby has plans for this f5 knight. I don't know if he pre-planned it or not, but it is a pretty interesting move, which we will be looking forward to. So yes, knight takes d4. Knight takes d4. There have been many times when I have played almost automatically e takes d. That's not what Keres does. First, he takes with the rook. The bishop comes back to capture. It's very interesting to me that it's, it just feels as if, Bobby's pieces are being, almost sucked back to where they started. Now, Keres plays e takes d. And it would seem that Bobby would play knight takes pawn or something like that, but he doesn't. He plays the very interesting and good move, knight to h6. An amazing move, really. Pawn takes, and now he has this little, maybe we should call it geometrical motif. He has a double attack. Queen to g4 giving check and also attacking the knight. Obviously, the king has to get out of check one way or the other. Queen comes down and takes the knight. This pawn on f7 is hanging. The chess engine recommends not what Keres played. The chess engine would prefer to play here rook to e7, I believe. But I don't think you can call this move bad. Bishop to d5, defending the pawn. Bobby pulls back the queen. Keres attacks. Notice that this pawn here on e4 is pinned. If the pawn were to take the bishop, the black rook would take the white rook on e1. Back comes the queen. Now the pawn from Keres, continuing now, putting a lot of pressure on this pawn. It is not a safe situation. This bishop on f4 drives the rook back, and now the queen comes away. The bishop takes on e4, and Bobby drives it back with f3. This bishop is in a difficult position. If it moves away, there will be two attackers from Bobby, the queen and the rook, on this rook. So Keres brings the bishop back to c6, defending the rook. Bobby is not going to contest the e file, so he comes here to the c file, and Keres puts his bishop to a bit of a safer place. The chess engines will tell you that queen to f7 is a good move, wanting to attack this bishop and I think these pawns. Bobby plays bishop takes on h6. Not a bad move. The rook comes up. Now the bishop takes the bishop. Queen takes the bishop. This queen is in a bit of danger of being trapped. Bobby backs the queen up. Keres offers a trade of queens, which Bobby accepts. Now we get into the endgame, and this is very interesting to try to remember. The king comes up. Always activate your king in the endgame. This king and this bishop are in a nice little line that can be used for pinning. Keres breaks the pin. I think Bobby's intention is to go after the d4 pawn. He brings his queen over. Keres advances the pawn. Now, before I do that, I would have thought that a better move, I haven't checked this with the engine, but I would have thought a better move than moving the king to e2 would have been fixing this f5 pawn by playing f4. But I am not the player that Bobby Fischer is, that's for sure. But Keres, nor am I the player of Paul Keres. But Keres pushes the pawn forward. Well, Bobby is going to start grabbing some pawns. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns he has, and Keres has 6 pawns. That's not how the game is going to end, that is for sure. Pretty sure that king comes up here. This can be difficult. Let's see. The king comes up here. King comes up. The rook takes. The black rook's going to come over. King's going to go back. Then this bishop's going to come up, and the rook's going to take. I think that's right. I think the king comes up. Okay. Yeah. Now the rook will take. Yes. And this rook comes over and gives check. Yes. This king comes back, and now the bishop. Now it's an interesting move. It certainly allows the rook here to take the pawn, but the bishop is also eyeing a pawn, which I'm sure Keres believes he will get eventually. So the rook now takes off the pawn. The king comes up and attacks the rook, which now steps aside to the open file. Keres attacks the rook. I think he wants to put his own rook on the c file if possible. And Bobby pulls the rook over to h6. That gives Keres the opportunity to take the c file, where he will attempt to come down into the white territory and grab some pawns. Now here, I suppose this is a game that grandmasters play. We have rook h5, king d6, rook h6, king e5, rook h5, king d6. Does Bobby want a draw? He says no. Keres comes down here and attacks the bishop. Bishop goes to d3, certainly eyeing the pawn on b5, and now Keres returns the favor. And Bobby says no to the draw. Bishop takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Rook to b1. King to d3. And now Keres makes an interesting move. I think he wants to get this white rook off of the g file so that he will be assured of being able to capture not only the pawn on b2, but also the pawn on g2. So he plays the move h6. Now, I don't know why Bobby plays his rook to g6, other than he doesn't want the king to come on to the 5th rank. The 5th rank. So he plays his rook over here. Now Keres takes the pawn that he's been wanting. The king takes a pawn. The rook takes a pawn. And now, notice the white king is now on the 4th rank. And now the rook takes the pawn. And this king is driven back. It moves over to the king's side because this is where the action is going to take place. White to move. The king comes over. Keres brings the rook up, attacking the bishop. The bishop flees, and now this bishop comes to f6. h7. This bishop will be very important coming up. Bobby does not take the pawn here. He wants to get his bishop back into the action around those pawns. Keres wants to get rid of the kings. Wants to get rid of the rooks. He probably wants to get rid of the kings as well at this point. Things are not going well. Bobby says, no, I'm not going to trade in that manner. What Fischer does not want, he does not want this king up here on the 6th rank. The king comes back for the purpose of supporting the rook, again, trying to get an exchange. The bishop comes back now and is supporting and protecting these pawns that are so important. Keres resumes the attempt, and here comes now the rook again. If Bobby refuses to take the rook and continues to move back and forth, well, it will be a draw, won't it? So Fischer is fine taking here because it doesn't bring the king forward with, we might say, with tempo, right? The king doesn't come forward on the recapture. So he takes, the bishop takes, now he grabs the pawn. This king comes up. He really wants to get onto the f6 square, and this is where Bobby says, no, you're not coming up. The chances of a blockade with the king on the f6 square markedly rise. So Bobby doesn't want that. And here, the chess engines will tell you this is a one position, and table bases, or whatever version of table bases you might use, will tell you that as well. The bishop here comes to d3. This pawn gets off of the not very good f3 square. The Keres is perfectly happy to sacrifice his bishop for this f pawn at the first opportunity, because then he will have a draw. So the bishop wants to stay on this diagonal, keeping this pawn from promoting. Bobby presses his pawn forward. And giving check. And now the king goes back onto h8. Probably the most, the safest, as it were, but also certainly in the event of getting the bishops traded off, getting rid of the f-pawn, it would be certainly the best place for him to be. This bishop, Fischer brings the bishop up. He would love to go into a two-pawn up endgame. Keres says no. And now what? Well, this happens. The king comes up attacking, but of course, this isn't the right way. Not really the right way, I don't think. So the bishop comes down here to c4, and now the king comes back, and the bishop comes back up and says, well, what are you doing? I can imagine Keres thinking to himself, don't you know how to play this? It should be noted, up until now, Bobby has not beaten one of the Soviet grandmasters. This will be the first. The bishop comes back. Yes. King comes up. And now Bobby is quite happy. Take my bishop. This will be a one endgame. And Keres says, no. All right, now what? Now what? We're going to, this diagonal is wide open now. So Bobby pushes the pawn. Up comes the bishop. Again, trying to control this movement forward. Bobby plays his bishop here, again, capturing This bishop would be perfectly fine as far as Fischer is concerned. This would still be a 1 endgame. Keres moves the bishop back to c4. And now we're going to get what I think is a pretty interesting position. Bobby brings his bishop up to g6. The king moves to g8, and now he puts his pawn onto f6. And Keres resigns. If you notice, all of the squares that are controlled, and this king is in a box. So, yeah, Bobby will move his king over and around this way and be able to promote the pawn. Well, that is the exciting game of Fischer versus Keres, and as I already mentioned, it is the first time he has beaten a Soviet grandmaster. And perhaps now they are beginning to think that Bobby Fischer might actually be a candidate for world champion. Well, that is still over a decade away at this point. So, well, I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you got something out of it. And if you liked it, give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more of this content, please go ahead and subscribe. All the best, and we'll talk to you later.